Okay, so in the category of, yeah, we knew that. We didn't need a study to tell us that. Trump is pulling America under authoritarian rule, International Human Rights Group warns. Um, Again, yeah, we knew that. Anyone who's been paying attention, unless you're a Trump sycophant or anyone else in his cult, yeah, you knew that. All right. A year, and this is from The Advocate, but the study comes from Amnesty International. A year into President Donald Trump's second term, Amnesty International and a coalition of U.S. and international rights groups are warning that the United States is exhibiting clear signs of democratic backsliding, marked by the erosion of civil liberties, weakened rule of law, and the normalization of coercive state power. The warning comes with the Monday release of Amnesty's 46-page report, ringing the alarm bells: rising authoritarian practices and erosion of human rights in the United States, and a recent press conference convened to assess the administration's first year back in office. Together, the report and briefing argue that executive actions and administrative measures have pushed the country onto a dangerous trajectory, consisting with the authoritarian patterns Amnesty has documented globally for decades. Those concerns have been sharpened by the January 7th killing of Renee Nicole Good, a queer 37-year-old Minneapolis mother and U.S. citizen who was fatally shot during a federal immigration enforcement operation. Human rights leaders said the administration's authoritarian trajectory has extended well beyond immigration enforcement to include the early and deliberate targeting of transgender people, an approach they described as both symbolic and strategic. Jessica Stern, co-founder and co-president of the Alliance for Diplomacy and Justice, said attacks on transgender people have not been incidental but central to the administration's political strategy from the outset. Stern previously served as a special envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI plus persons under President Joe Biden. The weaponization of trans people's lives has been baked into the very fabric of his political identity, Stern said, pointing to Trump's campaign spending aimed at stoking fear around transgender rights and his decision to sign an executive order targeting what his administration calls gender ideology on his first day back in office. Trump issued an executive order on his first day back in office establishing that the U.S. government does not recognize transgender or non-binary identities and instead recognizes people only by their sex assigned at birth. And like I've mentioned before, intersex kind of screws that up because if you're born with the genitals of both sexes or organs of both sexes, so how can anyone determine what your sex was assigned at birth? Because basically your sex assigned at birth is just a guess at that point. But anyway, Stern said that timing mattered. In authoritarian systems, governments often begin by singling out a small, stigmatized population to test public tolerance for rights rollbacks and to normalize the idea that certain people can be excluded from legal and social protections. And actually, according to the Human Rights Campaign, it's not just trans people who are going back in the closet and are scared. It's homosexuals as well, because they're afraid to do anything as innocuous as holding hands of the person they love, simply because of the environment we live in, which that should not be happening. By focusing so heavily on transgender people, particularly trans youth, service members, and those seeking medical care, the administration sent what Stern describes as a broader signal that communities already vulnerable to discrimination could be treated as political adversaries rather than rights-bearing individuals, even as institutions designed to protect civil rights are weakened or dismantled. I get a lot of people, particularly from the right, whining about how intolerant the left is because so many liberals want nothing to do with people who voted for Trump. This is why. Especially if you happen to be part of the group that is being told you are not allowed to exist. Why would you want to be friends with someone who had no problem voting for that? Of course, you're not going to want to do that. And if you actually care about the people that are being targeted, you wouldn't want to be friends with those people either because they're the ones who are making these people's lives harder. All right. Amanda Claysing, an Amnesty International USA official who moderated the briefing, said the scope and speed of the administration's actions set Trump's second term apart. We can say categorically that President Trump's second term has been a human rights disaster at home and abroad, Claysing said, citing executive actions that have shrunk civic space and undermined legal safeguards. And internationally, if you want to know what they're talking about things like USAID. The programs that literally were keeping people alive. And just also, they, declaring that they don't care about protecting people's rights abroad. Trying to get countries to, stop being bigots and stop being dicks to certain people. We decide we're going to stop doing that. So, of course, these countries feel like they can just trample on people with impunity because the U.S. has basically said, peace out. Amnesty's report documents attacks on press freedom, punishment of protest and dissent, intimidation of journalists and lawyers, coercion of universities and civil society, erosion of due process, and the increasing militarization of domestic law enforcement. Now, we've seen the attacks on press freedom, from the attacks on Jimmy Kimmel and the cancellation of Stephen Colbert to the lawsuits, and now CBS is being run by a Trump sycophant, and so now you can see that CBS News is having to be very careful. Hell, 60 Minutes aired a piece that probably wouldn't have gotten the attention it got if Barry Weiss didn't say, "Oh, we need the administration to respond." And basically they don't respond. So what, you're going to just kill the story? So that's CBS. ABC capitulated to Trump because George Stephanopoulos actually called what Trump did rape, because that is how most people think of what he said, even what he did, even though technically it was sexual assault. I mean, I'm sorry, how is that better? But the fact that the press is capitulating and are afraid to ask him, heck, look at how they're treating Trump. If this was Joe Biden and he was slipping, which he was, and he was slipping, the press was on his ass 24/7 about that. Now it's like, oh, this is just Trump being Trump. They briefly mention his cankles. They briefly mentioned the bruise on his hand, but they're not, constantly questioning his fitness for office. They are just going to show clips, um, sanitized clips to make sure he doesn't sound as absolutely insane as he really is. And so, yeah, this is the press running scared. Punishment of protest. Well, we see what's happening with ICE. We see what's happening with ICE. People started protesting this regime, and so they sent in ICE because of immigration enforcement. But they're going after U.S. citizens. They're going after anybody who looks at an ICE agent wrong. It is just unbelievable. Intimidation of journalists and lawyers. We've seen with the journalists, like one journalist, I think from CBS News, was just sitting in front of an ICE office. She wasn't even doing anything. And she got hit with a pepper ball. It's not like it was an accident. They were shooting in her car. So journalists are being intimidated, along with the press freedom thing. And lawyers, well, at the beginning of Trump's reign, he got law firms to capitulate, which didn't work out very well for the law firms because they lost clients. Because, you want a law firm who's going to fight, not, fall over and kowtow to a president because he said so. Let's see. Coercion of universities, same thing. And civil society. All right. Erosion of due process, because a lot of the people who are defending what ICE is doing and what this administration is doing don't seem to care that due process is completely non-existent. People are being deported without their day in court. They're just being deported because Stephen Miller thinks that they don't belong in this country. U.S. citizens are being detained, and then when they find out that they're U.S. citizens, ICE is like, oh, kicks them out of the car or just walks away and pretends like nothing's happened. Or they will hold even U.S. citizens in detention centers for hours until they can find out the truth. Because they either don't believe them or because, again, this person looked at them wrongly. Or then, again, there was the death of Renee Nicole Good. Because reasons. Some people think it's because she wasn't afraid of him, and that's what toxic males do. They want women to be afraid of them. Some people thought it's just simply because she's a lesbian or in a lesbian relationship. And maybe it could be a combination, but either way, doesn't matter. Let's see, where was I? And the increasing militarization of domestic law enforcement. Exactly. We're not just talking about ICE, we're talking about Border Patrol, we're talking, let's face it, even this has been happening with police departments for a while, that they've been getting the military's hand-me-down. So yeah, not a great thing. The organization warned that the United States now fits a familiar global pattern. Governments consolidate power, discredit critics, punish protests, and weaken courts and oversight bodies until accountability becomes difficult to restore. Okay, now, consolidate power. Yes, that's what Trump is doing because Congress is run by Republicans. They are sitting on their hands, twiddling their thumbs, picking their ass, whatever metaphor you want to use, instead of actually doing their damn jobs, which is to keep this fucker in check. The Supreme Court rarely admonishes him. It sounds like they might think that him trying to meddle with the Fed is a bridge too far, but it's your own damn faults for telling him that he can do that for all the other independent agencies. So they created a monster and now they think that they can constrain him. So yeah. Let's see, discredit critics. That happens every time. Every time somebody criticizes him, every time there's a political opponent, he goes after them. Like Letitia James and James Comey, with apparently mortgage fraud is his favorite thing right now, which, of course, with today's Republican Party and MAGA, if Trump accuses you of something, he probably did the same shit, which he did in the 90s. So yeah, he goes after his critics. He just tries to discredit them. Actually, I've seen people that when I would be part of political debates, there are certain people I just don't bother with because it's like they're living on a different earth. They're living somewhere in the multiverse because they believe everything Trump says, and when someone points out facts like Trump is a convicted felon, oh, that's lawfare. But, what happens to the Democrats, that they're the corrupt ones. So, yeah. Yeah, they're just he says these things and there are those people, those drooling idiots who will walk and agree with him. Makes you wonder how they breathe unassisted. Anyway, punish protests, mentioned that already, and weaken courts, which I mentioned already. And oversight bodies until accountability becomes difficult to restore. Okay, not only is the Supreme Court weakened because they're basically allowing him to do whatever the hell he wants, it weakens the appeals courts, the appellate courts below the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court's like, nah, dude, we're gonna, rule this through the shadow doctrine, but we're not gonna explain why. And so the federal courts are like, so what do we do with this? And the answer is nothing, because the Supreme Court is just going to get mad at you for, not reading their fucking minds and are going to just do whatever the hell they want. And oversight bodies, well, they fired pretty much all the inspectors general. So whatever oversight in certain areas that could have prevented Trump from doing what he's doing, or preventing Doge from doging, we didn't have that because Trump fired everybody. All right. Immigration enforcement has emerged as a central proving ground for the tactics amnesty warns are reshaping U.S. civil liberties. At the press conference, Nicole Wittersham Deputy Washington Director at Human Rights Watch, described the expansion of third country deportations and aggressive enforcement actions as among the administration's most severe abuses. Exactly. And not only do they send them to a third country because they can't legally send them to their own country, so they're illegally sending them to a third country. Makes perfect sense. But the most notorious one is CCOT, sending people to El Salvador. Let's see. And of course, there's what ICE is doing, especially in Minneapolis. In 2025, the United States is conducting enforced disappearances, Wittersham said, citing the transfer of migrants to detention facilities abroad despite documented risks of torture. Not only are they disappearing them abroad, they're disappearing them in this country. I mean, there are people who are in detention centers that their family doesn't know where. And let's face it, because of the way ICE operates, plainclothes, masks, don't identify themselves, nondescript vehicles, literally anybody can pretend to be ICE and kidnap someone and nobody will know what happened. Andre Hernandez Romero, a gay Venezuelan asylum seeker who worked as a makeup artist and hairstylist, was sent along with more than 200 other men to CCOT, a torture prison in El Salvador, because the Trump administration declared him to be a member of a gang, which he wasn't. Romero has no criminal record and denies being part of any gang. He was eventually freed from confinement and described physical and sexual abuse in an interview with The Advocate last fall. And I'm not surprised about the sexual abuse because he, volunteered the information that he was gay. I'm sure that went over really well. Urza Zaya, president and CEO of Human Rights First, said the immigration crackdown has driven record detention levels and deaths in custody while spilling into broader assaults on constitutional protections. Yeah, the absolute latest one is that ICE memo that basically says, Fourth Amendment? What Fourth Amendment? The authoritarian playbook that I spent decades fighting overseas has come home to our shores, Zaya said. Goods killing has intensified scrutiny of those tactics. She was fatally shot by ICE agent Jonathan Ross during a federal enforcement operation in Minneapolis. Federal officials described the shooting as self-defense, while witnesses, family members, and civil rights advocates have disputed that account and called for greater transparency and accountability. Video of the shooting from several angles calls into question the government's assertions that Good targeted the agent. Protests following her death have linked the incident to concerns about the militarization of immigration enforcement and its spillover into routine civilian life. And yeah, not only are videos from every angle, Jonathan Ross's own video, his own cell phone video, shows that he was not in any fucking danger. So, yeah. This is from 1984. The last command, the most vital command, I believe it was, I can't remember the exact quote, is, don't believe your eyes and ears. Basically this regime is going to tell you what you see, what you hear, what you think. I mean, I'm pretty sure when George Orwell wrote that, he didn't intend for that to be a how-to manual. Just like Margaret Atwell, I think that's her name, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, probably didn't want actual, didn't write it as a how-to manual either. But here we are. We have seen where this road leads when dissent is punished, oversight is dismantled, and people can be disappeared or expelled beyond the reach of the law, Amnesty wrote in its report. But we also know something else. The slide is not inevitable. There is still time to stop it. Unfortunately, the people who are in power to stop it have no interest. And I'm not talking about the Democrats, because there's only so much Democrats can do. So, yeah. Basically, it's up to us, and all we can hope for is that because Trump has screamed so many times that his election win in 2020 was stolen, all I can think of is, what if he tries to steal it in 2028? There are plenty of people who think he's stolen 2024. They just can't believe that he won. That 77 million people would vote for him. And all I can say is, are you new to this country? I mean, fascism has been an export for a while. Hitler idolized Henry Ford. They looked to the Jim Crow laws and eugenics and all that. And so yeah, Hitler had these ideas, but he also looked to us to how to go about it. It's not like this was strictly a European concept. We had fascism in this country for a while. Anyway, that is the end of that article. So I believe that's all I have for this video as well. So I will see you guys in the next one.